Tarry here, where the stories never grow old, and you hear something new every time they are told, and it comes clear. So tarry here, where it doesn't matter your age, and when we gather round the table, we all take the stage year after year. So tarry here.
Welcome to the Enlighten Radio Storytelling Hour at enlightenradio.org. I'm Fanny Crawford.
And I'm Stasi Okowski.
We are broadcasting from Bolivar, West Virginia,
Salt Lake City,
Utah, and Hagerstown, Maryland.
Yes.
Oh, that's amazing to me.
That is.
Today is November 17th. It's Monday, 2025. And our theme today is All the Light We Cannot See.
Yes.
And before you and our audience shake your heads and wonder, how are they going to do that?
I've got a number of things to say about that. Of course, you know that.
Do you have anything else you want to say first before
you
talk about that?
Big Story Series has wrapped up for the year. I know Stories in the Round has not wrapped up for the year, and you'll talk about that.
I will.
Adam Booth has announced that there's going to be some changes for next year. They're going to have more than 10 Speak Story Series programs. So people need to go onto the site speakstoryseries.com and check it out, where Adam has all the explanations you've ever wanted to hear or read about the upcoming year, and his reminder that you should get your season passes, and an explanation about what's going to happen next year. There's going to be more opportunity to join Speak Story Series, more than just monthly. And I'm excited about that. I think it's going to be wonderful. So it'll be expanded and give a greater opportunity for more people to hear outstanding storytellers and outstanding stories, and not just once a month. So
great.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I'm looking forward to it. And the last program earlier this month, actually just a week ago, I guess, was just, I thought, I've said this before, I guess, but I've run out of superlatives. I thought it was by far the best, certainly the best of the three commissioned stories so far, although all of them were outstanding. But this was about the Statue of Liberty and presented by two tellers, and just amazing. I thought I knew a lot about the Statue of Liberty, and I found out much more than I knew, a much greater amount of information and interesting information about the Statue of Liberty, and presented in such a way that was truly outstanding. The statue itself had an appearance, and through the voice of one of the tellers, and how she was dressed, and the explanation of the information about the statue was just outstanding. I'm so glad that there is a recording of it that I could see it a second time, and be tempting to try to record the recording because of Yeah, I saw that person do the door again. I love that.
Best.
You know, well, I think it's so neat. So, anyway, for anybody who hasn't seen that, just look at speakstoryseries.com and check it out, because I think the recording is still available. And boy, it's worth it. I would suggest anyone who's teaching history in our country and is hearing this broadcast now should pass it to all their friends and all their compatriots who are in the game of teaching history to any level of children, from elementary school all the way through college and graduate studies, to see this program. What an outstanding presentation, not only of storytelling, but especially of information, presented in such a wonderful way. So there's my push this morning.
Well, I haven't viewed, I was not able to be there. I do have the recording and I hope to see it later today. So
I think you will really be impressed. It's just truly wonderful. And I wrote to Adam, as I do after all the things, and I told him what I thought of it. I even wonder sometimes, I guess, I think by now Adam probably expects to get something from me after each of those, because I do like to let him know. He has mentioned in the past, he loves to get feedback, and he always has told me he enjoys the feedback I give about the programs, because I look at them strictly from the point of view of a storyteller. And though he doesn't say it, I look at it from the point of view of a jealous storyteller. Because to see people in a field that I love and that I thought I was out of it, and I'm not. I'm back. I was out for a short while,
yeah.
and I'm not good. I have no intent of traveling outside of this building. However, I no longer have shut that out of the possibilities. And I had such a wonderful premiere here, far better than I ever could have imagined, and a great reception from the people here. And I'm excited about my next chance to tell stories, which will be in December.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to hearing your report from that.
And
okay.
So
I want to thank Andy Offit-Irwin for opening our show this morning with Terry here. And I will report on stories in the round later in the show. But are you ready to start?
I am, and I would like to. I hope John will enjoy this very much. I'm sure that our listeners will enjoy what we're going to present. However, I would like to introduce this by mentioning a couple of ideas. One is the title of this book that inspired me to want to present this show today: All the Light We Cannot See. I wonder, of all the people who read the book, and anyone who would know about this novel, who would read it, I wonder how many of them would define this the same way I do. What do they mean by, what does the author mean, and what do the What does it mean by all the light we cannot see? And I think it fits with what we're doing right now. I'm sure that the most people, or at least a lot of people, who listen to our show and understand that we use the Zoom app to connect to do this show, since we're over 2,000 miles apart. That title, All the Light We Cannot See, fits perfectly for what we're doing, because people's first idea would be, oh, well, they're doing this by some kind of computer stuff, and it's electricity. And it is sort of, but it's really all about light. Our program, our information, the ability we have for you to talk from Hagerstown to John, our station manager in West Virginia, and for the both of you to talk to me in Salt Lake City, is being done by light waves. Radio waves are light waves. Lots of people don't know that. They think they're sound waves, but they're not. They're light waves. And that, anyway, I was so excited to read this book. It was difficult at times, but I just fell in love with it. In fact, over the weekend, my wife and I watched a 4-part movie made based on this book. And like all movies based on a great book, there were some differences. And I think Terry was very impressed. I didn't even fuss about the differences. I usually do say, oh, that was different but I just accepted the fact that taking a great piece of literature and turning it into a film that requires that you do some shifting a little bit in order to tell the story properly. Anyway, what struck me about this and what made me want to talk about it today is some of the characters in the book. Overall, and I did read some reviews of the book, and my own review of the book is from a completely different point of view. I looked at some individual characters. I didn't look at the book as a kind of picture of the time for when it was written or what was going on in history so much as I did from characters, from the individual characters. And one of the characters in it was a blind girl. A fact that anybody who's read this book should know, or anybody who might want to read this book should know, is when the movie was made, the actresses who played the young blind girl and then the older teenage blind girl and young 20-year-old blind girl, those two females are blind, the actresses. So it wasn't an actress, especially in the older parts of the later parts of the movie, pretending to be a blind girl. There was a blind person, a blind woman, acting the part of a blind person. And in reading the story, I was touched so much by, she was taught by her father how to go about the city she lived in if he wasn't with her, how to go out of the front door, count the steps, turn one way or the other, keep track of the steps, keep track of the sewer grates that she would pass by, keep track of the number of intersections she would come to, and whether there was a curb to step off of or just a simple grade of some kind. And her father made a miniature of that city, of the area that she would want to walk in to get to the museum or to the library or to different other places. And she practiced with him walking to those places. And then she could also, in her room where he had built this model, she could, with her hands, her sensitive fingers, she could touch the model and feel her way to practice so that she knew how to do that. And she could do it by herself. She could actually walk to many places without help. And there were other characters in the book that I enjoyed very much. A young German soldier who was introduced as a brilliant child who could manipulate the wireless radio. This was in the years of the 40s during the Second World War. And this character, Werner, was so brilliant at working with parts of the radio. And at that time, it wasn't just a box that you could turn the switch on after plugging it in. You had to have the wire rolled around a coil. It had to have certain special parts, tubes, and it was very difficult to tune the wireless radio. It was called wireless, even though it was based on using these wires. And it was for broadcasts from different parts. And you could pick up broadcasts from different parts of the country, of the continent, and even across the oceans. This young man became a young part of the Hitler Youth. And as with any young person who started out at the age of about 10, being indoctrinated, he, of course, fell into the ideas that what he was doing was important and that he was following this great leader of this country. That changed over time when he realized how his brilliance and his ability to use the radio to help the cause really was not a good thing. And he learned that over a period of years. But the important impact on me as a reader was the character in the book, Marie Lar. That was a hyphenated name. And because she was blind and did everything that everyone else would do, go for walks, learn how to do things, feed herself, everything reminded me that as a young teacher, I was gifted with the opportunity to teach a blind girl. I was teaching in Reisterstown, Maryland. I taught in 7 different schools in my career over 40 years. But the one in Reisterstown, Maryland, I often think of was my favorite. I had spent the most years there. And I had gotten to teach chemistry, mathematics, algebra, and geometry. And I taught a little bit of astronomy over a few years. But the opportunity came in the 80s, early 80s, to teach a blind student. When I was told that before the school year began, actually, before classes began, that I would have a student in, first of all, in my algebra class who was totally blind. I was very surprised. I learned about the student. Her name was Stephanie Brown. And I learned some wonderful things about her. Before school began, I found out that Stephanie, who lived in Reisterstown and not too far from the school, was practicing coming to school in the morning by herself. At first with a guide or a companion to help her learn the way to the school. For a blind person, that's much more than knowing go this way and go that way. It's how many steps you take, and when you get to a certain street, what's the traffic light? What do you have to do in order to negotiate that street? And the school itself was on Reisterstown Road, which in my lifetime was one of the roads that I got to dislike because the traffic over the years that I taught there. And even when I first started, the traffic was very difficult. It was a main route between towns at the end of Reisterstown and the Baltimore Beltway. And that road was about 7 miles long, and it was filled with traffic in both directions. And there were lots of places to get off that road, lots of places to go. Owings Mills, Maryland, which over the period of time I taught there in that school in that area, was developed into a large shopping center area and a place for apartment buildings. And anyway, it was difficult. When I found out that Stephanie was practicing walking to school, this was in July and August, before the school year began, I was just dumbfounded. I couldn't believe it. And she wound up being able to walk to school by herself using a cane and cross Reisterstown Road, which I found an achievement that I was sure I could not do. No matter how long I practiced it, I would be terrified to cross a road like that. Anyway, and it was 4 lanes. It wasn't just a 2-lane road. It was 4 lanes, especially the closer you got to the school. So I did talk to some people about the book that I read, and a few people that I mentioned about this blind girl in the book doing all these things and, walking around the town and being able to get into certain buildings and so said, well, that it's a novel and, probably exaggerated and everything. And I was able to say to them, I don't believe it was exaggerated. I believe the person who wrote this must have known someone with that ability, because I did. And so I wanted to tell the story about my experience with Miss Stephanie Brown as a student of mine. The very first day of Algebra 1. I had Stephanie was seated in the first row, facing the chalkboard, which I realized was kind of silly in a way. It didn't make any difference whether she faced the chalkboard or not, except that I stood up in front, and that would be better for her to hear my voice, because she could not see the chalkboard. But in my efforts to, as a caring person and a teacher, and I wanted to do the best job I could for this blind student, I, in my introduction, first day of class, I always wrote my name on the chalkboard. Then I wrote what I wanted to be called. My name, I would write, was Mr. Ziolkowski, 10 letters. Lots of people never learned how to pronounce it properly. But I would say, students, I would like you to refer to me as Mr. Z. That's what the rest of the faculty calls me. If you have to call the school and ask a question about Mr. Z, or you want to complain about him, that's what you should say. I want to talk to somebody about Mr. Z, and everybody will know who you mean. And I always wrote my phone number on the board. And I wrote, with this quick thought in my brain, first day, I wrote, and we're in room 26. And I wrote, I'm writing that on the board, I'm putting down the 2, and behind it, I'm writing the 6. And when I did that, Stephanie, who was sitting probably 5 or 6 feet away from me in the front row, sort of giggled and covered her mouth. And it caught my attention. And I said, Stephanie, is something wrong? And she said, Mr. Z, how do the sighted students see the numbers if you write a 2 and put a 6 behind it? And I paused and realized that I didn't write a 2 and put a 6 behind it. I had written the 6 to the right of the 2. That was my first lesson in working with a blind student. I found out that my explanations had to be much different than I was used to, because you can't write a 2 in chalk and then write a 6 behind it and have anyone understand what you're saying. You must write a 2 and put the 6 to the right of it. That was my first lesson where I learned something from Stephanie. And as the days went on in that algebra class, there were many more things that I learned, and many more things that I became aware of. For the first time as a teacher and I had been teaching for at least a dozen years by then, I realized that there were a number of things I said that made no sense at all unless you happened to be on the same wavelength that I was. And of course, if you were a blind person, you couldn't be on the same wavelength, because the light I was saying things with wasn't the light that was helping you in any way. So during that year, an entire year of Algebra 1, there were a number of things that came up that I had to think about in preparing my lessons and make sure that I was saying them so that any student in my class would understand it. Another thing that I learned, and it never dawned on me before I taught a blind student, was that the textbook that Stephanie had was not the same as the textbook as the other children. It was the exact same information, but presented in a different way, because Stephanie read Braille. And Braille books happened to be much longer. It takes many more pages in a Braille book to teach, to present material. Stephanie's Algebra 1 book had 13 volumes. So at the beginning of the year, there were 12 volumes stacked on the side of my classroom on a ledge. And Stephanie had volume 1, and the other 12 volumes were on this ledge. And when Stephanie got to the point at the end of volume 1 and needed a new volume, she learned the classroom so well that she could go at the beginning of class and put volume 1 on the side and pick up volume 2 and take it to her desk. Well, many things happened in algebra that, and I have to say this, I became much better as a teacher because of having Stephanie in that class. The next year, Stephanie was in my chemistry class. And I knew that was going to be a challenge for both of us. But right away, I thought that's going to be a challenge for me, because how do I explain things? How do I explain things about color when Stephanie has been blind since she was a child and doesn't know what that blue and red and yellow, they don't look alike, and how do I describe that? And I was able to study during the summer and found out that there were ways to explain different things about color for chemistry. And one of them had to do with things being hotter or colder. However, I also found out that in English, and especially in English literature, the descriptions of colored things are often different than they would be in chemistry. A blue flame in chemistry is considered very hot. A white flame in chemistry is considered extremely hot. Well, the coolest flame in literature is blue. The hot flame in literature is red. And so right off the bat, I had to learn descriptions of colors and heat and how they related that were much different. Also, by the time chemistry came along and Stephanie was in my chemistry class, I had a lab period every week in chemistry for the students, where they did hands-on experiments, and of course, in my efforts to be a really good teacher for the student, I became her lab partner right off the bat from the beginning of the year. And it only took until the second lab experiment, maybe 10 minutes into the lab experiment, that we were working together, and Stephanie said, "Mr. Z, can we talk about the lab experiment and partners?" And I said, "Of course, Stephanie." I thought she wanted to know something about the other students, but she very quietly, she said, "Can I have a real lab partner instead of you?" And my first thought was, wow, who would be a better partner than me? I know all this stuff. However, I didn't say that to her. I realized, and she only had to say a few more sentences, that I was doing most of the stuff. I was the one touching most of the things and then explaining about that and having her do it afterwards, instead of like the other students, having them experience using the equipment and things. So even though it wasn't my idea, I was smart enough to realize I needed to give her a lab partner. So I did. I got, I, and in fact, she told me who she would like to work with because of somebody she had become friends with since coming to school the year before. So, and she did very well. She had questions. Her lab partner explained things to her very well. When there was anything that needed my input, they called on me, and I think she learned a lot about chemistry, and she did very well in the course. And once again, I learned from the blind students uh, and became, I thought, a better teacher because of it. And in the years that Stephanie was in our school, and she, graduated from Franklin High School, at one point she had to take the SAT test. And I was very pleased and very impressed that Stephanie had a PhD person, a specialist in working with blind children, who would come and check in with her at school and see how she was doing. And I often would have a short meeting with this doctor, with a lady. She was very nice. And she came to me in class and she said, Stephanie needs to take the SATs and she needs a reader. And they prefer, even though I know Stephanie very well and we've worked together, they prefer that she has someone different than her mentor, and like in my position, because they worry about influencing the student. And would you consider doing that? And I said, of course I would. Well, it turned out to be about a 5.5 hour experience, and with some breaks. And it was on a Saturday, and Stephanie and I and her mentor, and I would read the questions to Stephanie and explain things, anything I could based on her questioning. Not explain the problem if it was a problem or something, but explain how the question was worded and what the meaning of it was. So that was another wonderful chance I had to do that, to learn about the trials of students, and it was a great experience. I actually got a chance to realize that there were things that I took for granted because I could see the words in the sentence all at once, that was easier to understand than listening to one word at a time or words in a group. And there was one more experience that I would like to share about Stephanie Brown that just delighted me and impressed me. I have done many theater programs, and during those years, I was in a performance of Oliver, and I played Mr. Brownlow, Oliver's grandfather. And of course, he was a rich man. He dressed very properly. at that, at the right period of the time when the book was written in the 1800s and everything, very fancy clothes. Anyway, one performance of the show was done in Baltimore in a square around the Baltimore courthouse that was, I think it was called the Mayor's Summer Playhouse or something, where every Tuesday, or every other Tuesday, I forget exactly how it worked, but on Tuesday, they would have shows presented in that square, and they could have hundreds of people seated there, and there's a nice stage it was actually a cement platform, but it was built like a stage, and with a nice place for sets and stuff, and a backstage area where the actors could get ready to go on stage. And we presented that show. Well, as I was getting changed after the show, one of the stagehands came backstage and said, a friend of yours saw the show and would like to come backstage and say hello to you. And that was a normal happening. It happened frequently in the theater, where someone would, want to say hi or something, and they didn't want to miss you if you went out the back stage entrance or something. And I said, "Oh, of course." He said, "Well, you'll see." I was dressed, and I was standing near the place where I had a cubby where I could keep my clothes, and someone touched my arm and said, "I think your guest is here." I turned and looked, and across the area, the backstage area, was Stephanie. And she was standing there. There was a person next to her. Stephanie handed her cane. And I learned later that the woman that was with her actually was a friend of hers. Stephanie was now in college. And the friend told her exactly where I was standing in relation to her and approximately how far it was. And Stephanie walked across the backstage. None of the people there knew she was blind because she had given her cane to her friend. She walked over across the stage and said, "Mr. Z, you looked wonderful in your costumes, and you did such a nice job playing Mr. Brownlow." Well, I paused just now, and on that evening or that night, luckily I didn't fall apart until later. But I was able to step forward, give her a hug, and it was wonderful to be hugged by her. And she told me how much she enjoyed the show, and she even asked me some questions, not many, just a few questions about a couple of scenes I was in, and told me how wonderful I sounded because I sang at the end of the show when we came out to the audience. I and the boy playing Oliver sang, opened the song that we sang together with the entire group of people in the show. And she told me how wonderful I sounded. And then she said, "I know you're probably going to a party or something at the show, and so am I. So I'll say goodbye." She turned, walked away in the exact same opposite direction to her friend, and then they left. And we had a show the next, a couple days later. The show was presented in a theater that weekend. And there were a number of people who did not believe me when I told them that my guest, Stephanie, was blind. And I told them, I said, I think she put on the best act that night because she didn't want anyone else to know she was blind. And she wanted to show me how much she appreciated what I had done for her. So that's why I think this was a great book, and why I was so touched by it, because it reminded me of a personal experience I had that covered a couple of years as a teacher, and how proud I was to be a teacher of a blind student, especially Stephanie Brown. And she went on to Towson University and got a degree, and was able to become a teacher. And unfortunately, she died early in life. And I did not know that until a few years later when I got a note from the Alumni Association. Anyway, I've always been very proud that I got to know Stephanie, because she was such a nice person. She was such an accomplished person, and she was one of my heroes.
That's a wonderful, wonderful story, Stash. I hope you get to tell that one in person to a large in-person audience someday.
Well, I don't.
I am going to not talk further about that right now, because we have only about 10 minutes left in the show.
Oh my.
And I want to be able to do at least a part of my take on that wonderful book that you've been talking about. And so,
wow, I'm sorry. I didn't realize it was taking so much
that's
time.
okay. I knew it might take a while.
Wow.
I was trying to be flexible. Okay, so we're talking about all the light we cannot see,
Right.
and spinning off from the novel of that title. But my story is going to be somewhat different. I had a friend, a very good friend. There was a time I called her my best friend, though now that seems an imperfect label, because I'm forced to recognize that at different times in my life, I've had different best friends, and remembering that causes me to kind of cringe a bit and wonder if I'm making things up or have a more rosy picture of my relationships than maybe was actual. But well, because I had a best friend when I was 3 years old at Blankenberg Nursery School, but I cannot even remember her name now. And then I had another best friend a year later at the same nursery school. But we are still friends, even though it's now 69 years later. I can certainly remember her name. I even have a picture of us sitting together by a Christmas tree in 1954. And I do know her phone number even now, and maybe I even know her address. But then there was another best friend in elementary school who I haven't even spoken to since 1980 something. Although maybe I might be able to find her if I was diligent in tracking her down. But this particular friend that I'm grieving right now that I started this story with. She just died 3 Mondays ago, early in the morning in her house near Shepherdstown, West Virginia. And not only were we age mates, so it doesn't seem right for me to be here and she's gone, but we also raised our children together when they were very young, not to mention raising at least 4 cats, 3 dogs, a snail. Well, actually, there were 2 snails that my friend named Fred, but then one of them died, so she called the snail that was left Half a Fred. Half a Fred was the kind of humor that she could surprise you with. And then there were the goats. We lived on a farm. I acquired a nanny goat because I wanted to learn how to milk goats and how to make cheese. And at times I had more than a goat because to get milk, you have to breed her. And once you do that, you have more goats. And they rarely come in singlets. They usually are at least twins. And at one point I had 4 in one birthing. And then there were people who would give me goats even when I didn't ask for them. And if I hadn't had this particular best friend, I don't think, well, she attended a vet tech school for about a year until she decided that her instructors were idiots. She moved on, but she was always all about animals. But I don't think I could have managed those goats without her. Although we did very well together, raising all the animals and the children that we raised. But I did one time leave my mother stranded in Washington, D.C. for 2 or 3 hours past the time I was supposed to be picking her up at the bus station. We lived in Virginia at the time, outside Leesburg, and it was a hike to get down to DC. And I was very, very late because one of the goats, the original beloved goat mother of most of my goats, went into labor, and we couldn't get the vet there fast enough. And although everything worked out fine for the goats, but no one I knew had cell phones at the time. And so we couldn't reach my mother, and that ended up not being so good. That took a while, my mother, to get over how upset she was with me. Also, not so good at the time, my friend and I had very little money, just enough to keep our children fed in clothes and, pay for trips home to visit with their grandparents. So sometimes we spoke of our lives as held together by paper clips. Maybe our aspirations were too lofty, or maybe not lofty enough. Mr. Z, you commented on what I'm wearing today on the radio, so our listeners can't see this robe, silk robe that I'm wearing. It's not actually one that belonged to my friend, but it came to us in our farmhouse during that long ago time. You might call that time the 70s. But this robe reminds me of her. It's kind of enigmatic for me, of one of the difficulties of our relationship, emblematic and enigmatic. The long ago robe that my friend did wear every day, she would put on at usually early in the morning or late at night. She was a night owl. And her robe came from her time living in Egypt when her mother was teaching there at the American school. And that robe drove me crazy. because we lived in a big, drafty farmhouse, 3 stories, with an attic plus a dirt floor basement, and we had electric baseboard heat that was highly expensive. So we depended on 2 big wood stoves. And being an outdoor girl myself, my usual indoor attire between October and April was flannel-lined jeans or corduroys, turtlenecks, and wool sweaters. Whether I was indoors or outdoors in the garden, I kept those clothes on all day. And I was burning up when she was trying to keep the house warmer and warmer. So it was often 80 degrees in there because she wanted to wear that robe. She had all the same gear I did, but her favorite home attire was that long flowing Egyptian robe with nothing on underneath. And that meant she frequently turned on the expensive electric heat. As she said, "I feel more comfortable at home in my Egyptian robe." She never said with nothing underneath. That would have been self-evident. So we had our differences, to be sure. It wasn't all idyllic goat milking and taking the kids to visit grandma. But now, the point is, we had some adventures together, and even after our paths diverged and we hardly ever saw each other anymore, she would still tell me that she loved me. And that surprised me the first time I heard it, because I was afraid she didn't anymore. So I hadn't said that to her until she said it out loud to me. But now I do believe it, because this rift, this distance, she's gone. And it's only been 3 weeks, and it's hard to say goodbye. And I've been reading about all the light we cannot see, and hearing how much Mr. Z enjoys the book of that name. And I'm able to feel a little better about losing my best friend, because her light has not gone out. There is still so much of it right here in my heart, in my eyes, and in my ears, even shining on, even though she's not really available to me except through those personal, very personal memories and experiences, and bringing her back that way as much as possible. That's my story.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Oh,
I think we have about 2 minutes to close out the show. Do you have anything else you want to say?
yeah, I I'm not sure that I could ever perform that story I told to an audience. It took a lot. Took a lot for me to do it, even to you. Although, if anybody I could trust in the world, it's you. That I know that you would support me in performing and understand if I became emotional. But I tried to tell my daughter what I was doing, and my daughter actually had a faint memory of me talking about Stephanie when I taught her. Of course, my daughter was a young girl then, but I broke down when I was telling my daughter on the phone. I had to say, "I'll call you back."
Oh, wow.
I just it was just such a powerful thing in my life. And I know I knew you would understand, and you would probably enjoy hearing it. But even telling it just a few minutes ago, I had to bite my tongue a couple of times. It's just amazing to have. I've had so many students, and I've had so many wonderful experiences, but that have such a powerful impact on my teaching. And I thought about her for years. And there's one other thing I didn't say on the radio. Oh, we're still on the radio, aren't we?
Yeah.
But I was actually embarrassed. I can say this to you in the audience. It doesn't matter now, but I couldn't remember Stephanie's name at first. I could remember what she looked like, where she sat in my class, how she giggled when I was trying to write the 6 behind the 2, and in chemistry, and lots of things. I remember her graduation and how proud I was of her when she graduated from high school, and I couldn't remember her name. It was driving me crazy, and it's not. She was very important to me, but of course there are a lot of people important to me. I can't remember some of the wonderful athletes I coached. I can't remember their name. I can remember what they look like. I can remember races they ran in. I even remember some times and don't remember their names. And I know that's really not unusual, especially for a person my age. And I've forgotten a lot of things. But luckily, I was able to write to students and said, I'm embarrassed to say this, but I need your help. And I'm not embarrassed that I need your help, but I'm embarrassed that I forgot somebody's name. And I mentioned, this blind girl that I had in algebra and in chemistry, and she graduated from Franklin. And in no time, I got a number of students wrote back to me and said, it's Stephanie Brown.
I'm so glad you did that, Stash. That's important. We should talk further about this, but I'm going to close the show because we're over time. But thank you so much for sharing that. It's really important, and I'm glad you were able to share it.
And thank you for your story.
Okay, we'll talk more about that too. This is Fanny Crawford.
And Stash Thielkowski.
Your co-hosts for the Enlighten Radio Storytelling Hour at enlightenradio.org. We are independent community radio broadcasting from Bolivar, West Virginia, Salt Lake City, Utah, and Hagerstown, Maryland. The Storytelling Hour offers listeners a window into the world of telling by traditional and non-traditional tellers, encouraging you, our listening community, to share, preserve, and expand all of our stories. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for John Case up next.
Lots of new blues coming out this today. I've got the Australians and the Swedes. They're just generating all kinds of blues programs, and I don't know why the two of them are,
caught up with that.
But anyway, so that'll be on the agenda today. Thank you guys for your stories.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, John.
All right.
Appreciate
Take care.
this opportunity.
Bye-bye.
All right, everybody. Take care of each other.
Right.
It's late. Everything comes next.
All right. Yeah, I've got physical therapy coming up in a few minutes.
Oh, well, good luck to you. Every day is gravy. All right.